kids. It's a beautiful day out today. I have my windows open and I got a breeze blowing through, airing out the house after being locked up for so many months, since actually probably November. So it feels good to have an air and wind breezing through the house. So anyway, I'm going to continue reading in the New Testament, and now I'm up to where Jesus is almost to the point of being arrested and put on trial. Arrest in the garden. Judas knew where Jesus and the rest of the disciples would go when supper was over. Near to the city, on the slopes of the Mount of Olives, lay a quiet garden of silver gray olive trees called Gethsemane. Jesus often escaped from the busy streets and went to Gethsemane to think and pray. That night they crossed the brook and went into the garden. Peter, James, and John walked close to Jesus. "Don't go," he whispered to them. "Stay close and keep me company. My heart is nearly breaking with sorrow and sadness." Soon Jesus went a little way from them to pray. His friends could see that he was shaken with distress and grief. "Please, Father," he prayed with deep earnestness, "don't let me go through the terrible suffering that lies ahead. Rescue me from it, if that is possible. But above all, I want to do what pleases you, not what I want." In spite of Jesus' need of them, the three friends were so tired that they fell asleep. Twice Jesus gently woke them, but when he began to pray again, they dozed off once more. "Couldn't you stay awake with me even for an hour?" Jesus asked them sadly. "But now you must wake up. I am going to be taken prisoner. Look, here comes the one who has betrayed me to my enemies." The startled disciples rubbed their bleary eyes. Now they could make out the dancing light of lanterns weaving through the olive trees. The dull gleam of metal told them that an armed guard was on its way. As the procession advanced with certain steps towards them, they recognized with horror and disbelief the familiar figure of Judas Iscariot at its head. "See that you take the right man," Judas whispered to the guards. "He's the one I'll greet with a kiss." Judas walked straight towards Jesus. "Hello, Master," he called out and hugged him. "Judas, my friend, why are you here?" Jesus asked sadly. "Are you going to betray me with a kiss?" But the armed guards, brandishing clubs and spears, rushed up and seized Jesus as if he were a dangerous criminal. Peter was furious. He pulled out a sword of his own and lashed out wildly, cutting off the ear of one of the high priest's servants. "Put your sword away, Peter," Jesus said firmly. "If I wished to go free, I could call on armies of angels to fight for me. But I am ready to give up my life according to God's plan." Then Jesus gently touched the wounded ear and made it whole. The bewildered and terrified disciples could bear no more. Their master and leader was going to allow himself to be taken prisoner. That was the end of all their hopes. In panic and despair, they took to their own heels and ran. The armed band led their unresisting prisoner away. Next story. I don't know the man. Jesus was led by his captors to the house of Caiaphas, the high priest. Although it was nighttime, the council decided to meet at once and put Jesus on trial. They must not risk trouble from the excitable Passover crowds. Meanwhile, Peter and John had come to their senses. They must follow and see where Jesus was being taken. They kept a safe distance, but when they arrived at Caiaphas's house, John, who knew some of the members of the household, walked straight into the courtyard. Peter waited outside. "May my friend come in too?" John asked the servant girl at the gate. "Yes," she agreed, but she stared hard at Peter as he came closer. "Aren't you a disciple of that man?" she inquired, jerking her thumb towards the room leading off the courtyard, where Jesus stood facing his accusers. "No, I am not," Peter said indignantly. He thought of his rash attack on the high priest's servant and wondered if the story had got around already. He felt suddenly cold and made his way to warm his hands at the brazier of glowing charcoal that stood in the middle of the courtyard. A man nearby peered at him. You're one of that lot," he declared. "I don't even know the man," Peter insisted. All the while, a continuous low murmur of voices from the courtroom reached their ears. In one corner of the courtyard, a group of the servants whispered together and stared at Peter. One of them said out loud, "Whatever he says, he is a follower of the prisoner. Anyone can tell he comes from Galilee. Listen to his northern accent." Peter lost his temper and swore. "I don't know what you're talking about," he shouted. "I tell you, I don't know him." As he spoke, a cockerel crowed. crowed, welcoming the first pale streaks of dawn with terrible clearness. Peter remembered Jesus' words. Before the cock crows, you will say 3 times over that you don't know me. Peter looked across at the strong, quiet figure of Jesus facing his interrogators alone. Jesus gazed back with great understanding and love. It was more than Peter could bear. He had failed the person he loved and trusted most. He rushed out of the courtyard crying bitterly. And the next story in this journey is Judas's story. When Judas had led the armed guard to Gethsemane and shown them which was the man to be arrested, his part in the plot was over. He was free to go away and begin a new life. But now that the plan had been successfully carried out, the full horror of what he had done began to dawn on him. Judas had lived close to Jesus for 3 years, and he knew that Jesus had never done a wrong or unkind action. But he knew that those determined, ruthless men would not rest until they had brought about his death. On a sudden impulse, Judas set off, half running, to the temple to find the men he had bargained with. "I have done wrong," he told them. "I have helped you to arrest a man who is completely innocent." "That's your affair," they told him, a little amused at his earnestness. "We really don't care how you feel about it," and they went on with the conversation he had interrupted. With a cry of despair, Judas hurled down the 30 silver coins that they had paid him and fled. Then he took a rope and hanged himself. The next story is called Jesus Stands Trial. All night long, Jesus stood before the council listening to the false charges they made. None of the witnesses they called told the same story. They could prove nothing against Jesus. At last, in desperation, the high priest challenged Jesus directly. "Tell me on oath," he demanded, "are you the Messiah, the Son of God?" "I am," Jesus replied. "That settles the matter," the high priest declared. "The prisoner has claimed to be divine. He deserves by our law to die." But only Pilate, the Roman governor, could pass the death sentence. They must convince him that Jesus had committed crimes worthy of death by Roman reckoning. They handed Jesus over to the guards who tormented and ill-treated him while they made their plans. Early in the morning, they took Jesus in chains to Pilate's palace. Pilate was in Jerusalem to keep order during the excitable days of Passover. "This man has been stirring up trouble," they told Pilate. "He tells people not to pay taxes, and he says he's a king." If these charges were true, Jesus would be sentenced to death. But Pilate was certain that the religious leaders had trumped up the charges because they were jealous of him. He began to cross-question Jesus himself and could find nothing wrong that he had done. All the while, a mob below in the street, mustered and led by the priests and leaders, were chanting over and over, "Crucify, crucify, crucify." Pilate came out to speak to them. "This man is completely innocent," he announced. "He doesn't deserve to die." The chant swelled to a deafening roar. "Crucify, crucify." Pilate tried another way out. "It's Passover time," he said. "I shall set a prisoner free as part of the celebrations. Let me set Jesus free." But the leaders were ready with a new slogan. "We want Barabbas! We want Barabbas!" And the crowd took up the cry. Barabbas was a mob leader in prison for murder. Pilate was at his wit's end. If the crowd rioted, he might lose his job. He dare not release Jesus, even though Roman justice declared him innocent. He decided to wash his hands of the whole matter and hand Jesus over to be put to death by crucifixion as the mob insisted. So boys and girls, I have one more story to read to you about Jesus' crucifixion, and I will set that up as another YouTube video since I'm about 9 minutes into this one. Okay, boys and girls, take these words in, embrace them, and think about what Jesus has done for you and for me.